Hello, I'm your host, David Barnard, and with me today, RevenueCat CEO Jacob Eiding. Our guest today is Sebastian Röhl, an independent app developer from Germany who created HabitKit. On the podcast, we talk with Sebastian about quitting a job to build his own apps, going back to that job after failing to gain traction, and the inflection point that allowed him to finally quit for good. Hey, Sebastian, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm a huge fan of the podcast and of RevenueCat, of course.
Oh, bless you.
And Jacob, nice to have you back on the podcast. A long time without you.
Has it been? The production schedule for Sub Club is confusing and out of my sight, but I assume I'm on every episode. Is that not the case? Are there episodes without me?
Wow, we got to talk
about this, David.
I did some live episodes and then
I've
was out at
Very
Google
good.
I/O. Yeah.
Very good. I listen to every single one I'm not on, I promise.
Of course, you better. All right. So, Sebastian, I wanted to kick things off today. So, you're a career web developer, but now a solo indie app developer. So, how did you get started in apps as a web developer?
The motivation behind building mobile apps was actually because I decided to start my own app business. I just wanted to work on my own products and sell them on the internet and make a living of it. And all the ideas that I had were all related to best suiting for the mobile platform. And that's how I initially got excited for mobile app development.
It does feel like apps are a great market, not just that, like you were saying, that the ideas, but as a marketplace and having access to so many consumers directly through the app stores. Were there not any web projects that you thought would be successful, or was it just kind of more exciting to build apps versus your bread and butter kind of web development?
Yeah, so this whole web development thing always felt a little bit more intimidating to me. As a solo entrepreneur, you have to build this backend then, and you have to deal with payments and sales tax and stuff like that. And when you're on the mobile platform, all this payments and sales tax thing is handled by Apple and Google. And that was really a good point for me to start there. And yeah, the ideas, as I already said before.
Yeah, it makes it much more appealing. I feel like in web dev or like building indie web apps, you see much more like prosumer or utility SaaS kind of stuff and a lot less consumer lifestyle focused things. So it's almost like if you want to build stuff for consumers, for people, the web's not a great option, right? Like mobile is like clearly a better, and then of course, like all of the stuff that you discuss, like payments, like having a merchant of record, all of that stuff. And if you're in consumer, all of those problems are much more multiplied because like if you're selling B2B, your number of customers is usually much, much lower, right? You might be at hundreds if you're doing well. And in that case, like you're dealing with fewer jurisdictions and your compliance is maybe a little bit easier. But when you're dealing with consumers, it's thousands, right? And now you're multiplying that problem. So yeah, it's almost not even an option to do a consumer web app.
Yeah, and back when I started HabitKit, I already got this idea a couple of years ago for this app. And back then, when you scroll down all the way on my Twitter profile and look at my first posts, you can actually see me building a very early web version of HabitKit. And I actually completely abandoned this because habit tracking didn't feel natural to me on the web. So it felt much more better.
Well, I mean, you could build it as a progressive web app, I'm sure, but then you lose the distribution, you lose all of the things that make it nice about being mobile. This is like one of those controversial opinions. I feel like a PWA can never really totally feel as nice as a Swift or even Flutter or some sort of native backed mobile app.
I don't think that's a controversial opinion.
It is. Like, I still think some people, I mean, obviously it's people who chose to use that technology to like die on that hill, but well, a price of $1,000, the person can put a PWA in front of me and me not figure out it's a PWA. Like, I guarantee you I will know.
Yeah. So you mentioned wanting to build your own stuff, and there is kind of always that allure of a side project of like having something going on the side. But was it always the goal to like leave your job? What's so bad about having a day job?
I guess the first time that I thought about building my own apps was at the end of my university time when I was writing my master's thesis. And at that time, I discovered the indiehackers.com community and learned about all these cool people that are building their own products and selling them on the internet and actually make a living of it. And that felt super cool and exciting to me. And although I took a real job as a software engineer after university, the thought of bootstrapping my own business really got stuck at the back of my head. So after 3 years of working for that company, we were basically contracting for this other company and building their enterprise resource planning back office software.
Why would indie hacking seem appealing if you were doing that all day?
Yeah, so I guess it's the nature of contracting work. You have very limited control about how the product you're building will look like, how it will behave, what's the UX and the UI. And the only thing that you're mostly having control of is the technical side as a programmer in this project. And I'm not really the type of developer that unconditionally loves programming. I'm definitely not the type of software engineer that geeks out on optimizing algorithms or something like that.
Which also doesn't feel like something you're often doing when you're programming an ERP for an internal use case.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the type of developer that likes to make his own concepts and how a problem should be solved and then develop it myself and then see the concept in the real world. And yeah, so I got a little bit bored by this project that I couldn't really escape from. And don't get me wrong, the job was fine and I learned a lot, met many cool people. But at this time, I wanted to try my own stuff.
Was it also just kind of like having an outlet, like working this job where it sounds like as a consultant, it's like you just got handed specs, like you weren't even getting to like interact with a product team or be in the meetings where things were decided and stuff. So was it somewhat just like, I have to build things? It sounds like that's your deeper motivation, was like creativity and just wanting to like build products.
Yeah, in the end, the most important aspect was this creativity thing. I guess some jobs can definitely make that possible, but it's usually not the case in the contracting world. Maybe I would have been better off at a company where they develop their own product. I hope you can confirm that, but I can imagine that the developers at RevenueCat can bring in their own ideas and have a real impact on the product, right?
Sure. I think though maybe the moment it got ruined for you is when you found indiehackers.com. Because I think once somebody gets the idea that they need to do this or they want to do this, like all of the rest of it feels like you're just finding the justification to go do it, when really it's just you want to go do it, right? It's just something you need to do. And I try to tell that to folks that, and you're in tech long enough. And this goes between venture-backed startups down to like indie side projects going independent, all of that stuff. I think if you feel the need to do it, like you have it in you, like it's inside of you and you just need to go do it, you can spend all the time you want justifying it, building up the whatever things you got to do to convince yourself it's okay. But like the real decision is made up is like, is it inside you and do you have to do it? If it's like, it'd be nice, it'd be cool, but whatever, like do not do it. Do not do it, because like 9 times out of 10, and maybe it's worked out well for you, Sebastian, I don't know, but like it doesn't net out. But it will be successful if like you had to do this. And then at least even if it fails, like you did it, right? You got it out of you and you can decide then, like you have clear eyes about what you want to do with your life. And do you value the things that, because I guess like to you, like reading the indie hacker stuff, you said it was cool, but like what about it was appealing to you beyond the like having creative control over what you're building?
Yeah, so it's all about building a cool lifestyle business for myself. I want to work whenever I want. I want to take breaks whenever I want. If life gets in the way, something is with the family, I want to be there and want to have my business there and don't touch it, but it's somehow should run by its own. This passive income thing, I know it's not passive, but I just
it's like rental properties, right? Very passive, very passive. Yeah. For anybody who's ever owned a rental property knows it's very passive.
I mean, I just took a 3-week vacation and didn't have to do a single thing for my business, and it just continued to work. Yeah.
Wow. I had somewhat a different experience on the indie hacker side in a way, because I started the business first and just like jumped off a cliff. But I will say, for those kind of listening to this, while that is the dream and Sebastian has done it well, for me, it was like over a decade of just grinding. And this was before subscription, so it was always paid up front. And then, my apps often would get a lot of press. And then it was always like, okay, when am I going to get the next press? And so, I had a lot of flexibility and got to take some time as needed. But I think it depends on your personality and backup financially and other things as to whether even once you start to achieve some level of success, you can take that as a luxury versus like having this constant. And I had 4 kids along the way. So like for me, there was like this just constant fire under me. I'm saying this to kind of maybe balance out the perspective, is that there was just a constant fire. And so then even though I did see some level of success, I never took a 3-week vacation. So it's pretty awesome so early in your journey that you were able to really take that time off. I mean, for me, it was just always, what's next? And just grinding.
I think it's a big personality thing. I see this in entrepreneurs outside of tech a lot of times too, like folks that own cash flowing businesses and things like this. Like some of them are really good about actually using it to like lever into a lifestyle that they want. Others, it just becomes worse than a job because like a job you can quit or you can get fired, right? Like there are outs that are like accessible to you, but sometimes with these businesses, there isn't. And there's like, Sebastian, when you're gone for 3 weeks, didn't no customers get mad? Nobody like came up, or they did. And you're just like, you know what, they'll live. What's your philosophy for like creating these boundaries?
I usually get 2 or 3 emails a day at this season. In winter, it's a little bit more. But in summer, it's just 3 or 4 emails per day. And it's mostly feature requests. People saying, hey, I love your app, but it would be cool if you could add that. And that's not really an email I have to reply to.
But you're looking at them. Yes.
Did you look at them on vacation?
Okay. See, there's always in the lifestyle. They don't tell you this on Indie Hackers. You're out on your yacht for 3 weeks or whatever, but you are checking, right? And
I was checking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you even respond to some of them?
After I was back, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You're really on trial now, Sebastian. it's indie hacker court. But I think it's a good point. And like, obviously that doesn't feel intrusive to you, which I think also with a job can be very different sometimes, right? Like with a job, if you're on vacation or you're doing something and like the job tries to steal some of your time, like that feels much more offensive. Sometimes when it's your own thing, you're like, well, this is my own thing and I own it. And like, I have to do this. And it doesn't necessarily feel like work. But again, it's so psychological, like depending on the person and the mindset. And that's same for like your job. Like some people don't mind having to like take care of things for their job when they're like ostensibly out. Other people, it's like the worst in the world. And it really just depends on your mindset and personality and stuff like that. I don't even know necessarily that there's a better or worse way to approach it. But I do think it's interesting because we haven't got to this yet because you got into indie life and then you got out of indie life. Is that correct?
Not really, because my app business didn't really start as a side project because I actually quit my job to start my own business. Most indie hackers tell you as advice, don't do this, only do this when you have a stable income from your side hustle. But I actually did the opposite and left my comfortable job and then started my app business.
How did that work financially? You just kind of saved up and were single and kept your expenses low, or how'd you jump off that cliff?
I had this safety net that I built up before. I knew that at least as an experienced software developer here in Germany, it isn't really hard to find a real job again if the business goes downhill. So I got that safety. I built up some savings that I could live off for at least a year. And at that time, I didn't have many financial obligations. Of course, I had to pay for an apartment and food and stuff like that. But I didn't have kids, no loans for a house or something like that. So I was basically free to do whatever I want.
Yeah, this is hard to reason about for most people, like conceptualization of risk, right? When you're near the bottom, and that's not the bottom, like life's pretty good. You have an apartment, you have all these things, but like you don't have debt, you don't have obligations, you don't have a lot of stacked leverage on yourself personally. Like you can jump off a cliff and you're only falling a foot, right? Like, but even if you don't have a lot of assets, like if you have to declare bankruptcy, your credit's screwed, but like, what are they going to take, right? Like you don't have any asset. You know, most banks wouldn't give you loans and most of the time you're not going to end up in owing money that you can't pay. But you really, especially early in life, it's just a fact. There's less at stake. And that's often the time it's best to start something. But on the flip side, it's also like, you probably know the least, you're like least experienced and things like this. And I'm counseling somebody I know who's 21 years old and he's like thinking about starting a business right now, but it's obviously there's a lot of considerations. And I'm like, I'm always just like, do it. Cause like, even if you don't know what you're doing, if it fails, you put some stuff in your experience bag. If it succeeds, holy crap. If you started a business that compounds at 21 years old, like you could retire by the time you're 35 if you really wanted to, if it works out well, right? Like to be able to start that so early in your life is such an advantage. But again, there's no free lunch, right? So doing it early versus doing it later, like all has its trade-offs. I do think there's something to like talking to a lot of entrepreneurs. I think there's sound advice in like saving and making it safe before you can take a leap. But, and I'm curious how this motivated you, but I think when you jump off the cliff, even if you have some safety net, whatever, I think jumping before you have a rope to grab onto is a good motivator, right? It sort of like has to work. You know what I mean? Like, how did you feel about that jumping off with nothing in hand by the time you were independent?
Yeah, that definitely felt scary and weird. But I also, additionally to all the safety nets that I mentioned earlier, I also said to myself, okay, I time box this app business experiment to exactly 12 months. It seemed reasonable to me to have this backup plan if it doesn't work out. And I said to myself, okay, if this doesn't work out, I will go back to my old job or another job.
And what was your bar for definition of working out? Did you have like a number or like something in mind that you said like, oh, this is successful?
So the condition was to reach the base level, which I could live off. Some indie hackers call it ramen profitability.
Yeah.
But I actually didn't reach it. And so I left on good terms with my previous employer and then actually even got back to them.
Came
once
back
the
hat in
12
hand.
months were over. Yeah, I had to admit defeat and then had
Was
to go
it tough? Did you have a lot of pride and was it tough for you to go back and do that? Or did you just feel like, hey, I set myself this thing? Like, how was that psychologically for you to kind of have to go back?
That wasn't really so bad because in my free year, I learned so many great things. I got so much self-confidence. I developed these 2 cool apps and a lot of people downloaded them already. And that really developed my self-confidence. So going back wasn't really that bad. I even got a nice raise and yeah, it was a great decision.
There you go.
actually.
There you go, folks. At a minimum, you can come back and renegotiate your salary.
So during that year though, like how did things go? Like, did you already have like an app in mind when you quit? Or was it like you quit and like, okay, now I got to pick the product. Let's talk through that first year and like how you built stuff.
When I made the decision to start my own business, I didn't really have a good idea what app to build. I think in the end, the first idea isn't really that important. What's more important is to start moving and just build anything. It doesn't really matter what, because once you started building something, you'll automatically get new, better ideas.
Just start writing. That's like the famous thing for writing too. It's like,
Yeah.
just start writing. You start writing,
Exactly.
and then even if you throw it away, you're more likely not you're going to wander onto something good, right?
Yeah, just get into the flow. I'm sure it activates certain parts of your brain that are responsible for creativity or something like that. When I quit my job, I took a look at my personal life and tried to figure out what app doesn't meet my requirements. And I quickly decided that I want to build my own version of a fitness tracking app. Yeah, sounds really boring. There are already 100...
Slightly competitive market, yeah.
Yeah, there are already a million other fitness tracking apps, but I just wanted to start moving, and that's why I picked this idea. That's how I came to build my first app, LiftBear.
With this 1 year, it's ultimately a lot of time. So like you could have, and I would have been the person doing this, work for 12 months and then ship the app. Did you like have a deadline? Like I got to get this in the app store by X day so that I know whether it's going to work or not, so that I can iterate. Like, how did you set deadlines and set expectations in that 12-month period?
I already followed a lot of other indie hackers and I read some advice, and I already knew that I shouldn't develop this app for 12 months and then release it and then see that nobody really cares about it. I just was disciplined enough to buckle down and then develop it in the first 2 months of my free year and then launch it. So I didn't really had a problem with this.
Yeah, you have to have low expectations about what you're going to produce. I think
realistic expectations, not necessarily low expectations.
No, low. I say low. I should find. I saw a first version of Revenue Cap screenshot again the other day, and it looks terrible. And like, honestly, like I think, not to toot my own horn or whatever, but I think a lot of people would have trouble shipping that. And like, I just don't care what people think, like, you know, or like what the majority of people think or something like this, right? Like with your point, Sebastian, it's like, just do something. And I guess the flip side is like, maybe you're concerned about your perception of yourself and what you can create. That's one problem. I think another people are just concerned like, oh, what are people going to think about me? And the thing is like, even if it's crap, nobody pays attention. If you ship something crappy, it's fine because a few people might notice and a few people might be, this is crappy, but also like most people just won't notice and they won't care. And then you make it nice over time. And then more people are exposed to it as it gets better and better. Now there's flip sides. If you're like the humane team or like other teams like this, where you have a lot of spotlight on you, your initial launch really matters, but you're not the humane team. Like you're not, most people aren't that, right? You can just kind of ship some things. I think it's great. Like 2 months, that's a really good timeline to get something into production and start learning.
And we kind of spoiled the ending because you went back to your job, but what was the reception for LiftBear and how did things go at launch and then the rest of that year?
As you were already saying, Jacob, setting expectations is really important, not only in terms of what you're producing, also in terms of what the reception be of your first app. So LiftBear wasn't really a success. It was a very quiet launch. When I released it, I didn't have many Twitter followers back then. And I was, and still am, by the way, a huge beginner when it comes to marketing. So yeah, that was tough. I only got a couple of downloads, but I was proud to finally have my own app on the App Store and Google Play. That was special, a huge milestone.
Yeah, you go to the App Store, you download it, you see your name. There are some users, somebody downloaded it, right? I'm sure.
And you said a couple of people, literally 2 people downloaded it?
It were more, but
okay.
In the first week, maybe 100, and after that, only 10 per week or something like that.
Yeah, which then it's like 10 activate, 5 actually open the app, 2 actually finish onboarding, and then those all churn in a week, right? So it's below the minimum threshold for something that's actually being used, right?
But in some ways, that's actually incredible, though. It's like you built something and like 100 random strangers around the world found it and downloaded it. And then 10 people a week around the world. I mean, the power of the App Store, right? It's like people are searching, even if you're like number 50 on the list in a search or whatever.
It's like cosmic background radiation of the App Store, right?
You find it. Yeah.
When you saw those numbers, you now say like you're a bad marketer, you didn't think about growth. Did you go like, oh, I have a growth problem? Like, what was your diagnosis? Because at some point, 6 months in, maybe you're in the store, you know the numbers are not great. Like, what did you do or try, or what was your next move?
Yeah, so after this very quiet launch, of course, I still got feedback from friends and a couple of Twitter followers and from my family. Because I myself used the app daily, I decided not to give up on it immediately. And then I continued developing cool new features because that's what developers do.
You know how to do. Yeah. Clearly, I need more features.
Clearly, the problem is the feature set. So I added cool stuff like statistics and new exercise types and stuff like that.
There is a logic to that, right? Like there is a logic to build cool things as a method of growth. But you also have to have a channel to like tell new people that that feature exists, right? Because even if the 10 people that downloaded are incrementally more happy from that feature, like it's not going to create a growth engine. You know?
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty tough. Yeah, I did that roughly for 6 months. I also tried to optimize the store listing, doing some ASO, tried to do some marketing on Instagram, and I even tried Apple search ads, but the app wasn't going anywhere actually. And after 6 months, I couldn't take it anymore. I could look back on roughly $100 of revenue made totally in the 6 months.
It's brutal, right?
Wow.
Yeah, so that's cool because I made $100 with my app, but I knew if I want to continue working on this app business, I definitely...
Your personal burn rate, I assume, is a little bit higher than that.
Yeah, I definitely...
I mean, if it makes you feel any better, Revenue Cat, 12 months in, about 12 months in, I think we had made $300.
Yeah,
right?
Okay.
So like SaaS typically has a lower start rate, but still we were in that same position. I remember Miguel and I just being like, this will never work. Like 300 and 10,000 are so far apart in mentally, right? That you're just like, this will never work, right? So I can totally understand. That's very demoralizing at the beginning when you have just really small numbers. And like, if you put it in the context of like, you'll spend $100 on a nice dinner, right? It becomes really kind of brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly the point where you need to make the decision. Do I do something different with the same product, or do I pivot it completely into a new product? Or
do I go back to work?
Or do I go back to work? Yeah. But that wasn't the part where I went back to work. I still had 6 months in my full year.
Okay. Got it.
After all this LiftBear depression, I actually decided to focus on a new project then. I wanted to do it as an experiment. I set myself a very small deadline of 2 months of building it. And yeah, that's how I built my second app, HabitKit, which was way more successful then.
Did you know right away when you launched it? Was it like night and day between the two launches? Or when did you know that maybe this was a better try?
It was actually before the launch of the app. I was building in public on Twitter, and the first time that I posted a picture of the main screen of HabitKit, this post totally blew up, and I actually got 800 likes. That was a lot for me back then. That was the moment when I knew, okay, this could be more successful than LiftBear.
Interesting. What about that post? Because like that could just be a fluke, but there must have been something, right? Like most of my posts don't get that. And they're great, in my opinion. What was it? Was it just like, hey, here's what I'm building? Or was it like, hey, I'm launching this? Like, what was the nature of it that you think made it so interesting to people?
Yeah, so I guess the text was just here, this is the new app that I'm building. That's the main screen. And then I posted the main screen of HabitKit where you see the grid with the color tiles and stuff like that for your habits. That was it. And people seemed to resonate with it. They really liked it. And I don't know why, but it actually went through the roof.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's product market fit, right? Or that's something which growth does not matter as much if you have product market, or at least like growth is not requisite for some amount of success. If you have product market fit, i.e. like people are going to pull your product out of you, you can kind of wait and defer the like growth aspects. And in fact, like every joule of effort or dollar of effort you put into growth is going to be multiplied by more, the better your product is. And so that's really where you want to start. It's hard to quantify the value of those signals, but it's something, right? Like this is the challenge with product market fit or like validating, do I have an interesting product, especially before you have a product fully deployed and people using it in real measures of metrics. You really do have to look at these anecdotal qualitative things, and that does seem valid. So that had to be really encouraging while you're like pre-production to get that sort of response.
Yeah, that was awesome.
This is 8 months in now of your year of indie, but you still ended up going back to your job. So I'm assuming the launch didn't go quite as well as maybe the kind of one tweet blowing up indicated it could.
So in the first month after releasing HabitKit, I made more money than in the last 6 months combined. So that was a huge win. But yeah, so the first 6 months of HabitKit, I made roughly $1.5K in total revenue per month. But the sad part was that my self-imposed deadline of 12 months was over. And the revenue wasn't that great as I hoped.
Did you think about breaking your rules?
Yeah, I faced a tough decision to actually continue or returning back to my previous job. But ultimately,
that's a decision I think people don't realize. It's not just like, do I start a thing? There's a lot of these points, especially in the early days before you hit traction. And then even like throughout the life of a business, it's like, okay, I got this far. Do I double down? Do I keep investing? Especially if you're like unprofitable, like you're burning, right? It's like, okay, do I think there's a bet here that I can keep pouring into, or is it time to like cash in my chips and give up or change strategy?
If I had known what would follow, then I wouldn't have returned to my old job. So it's always a really tough decision. And it was actually pretty scary to continue burning through my savings.
It's real money.
And
yeah, exactly.
You're German. You can't break the rules. Right?
I wasn't going to say it. We don't do stereotypes here, but I was like, it feels like a very German thing to be like, I made a rule. I cannot break it.
Was it almost to the day or the month? Like you went back like right at the 12 months, or you kind of saw the writing on the wall and were kind of ramping toward it?
Yeah, it was exactly 12 months. I started my free year in April and went back in April again.
Wow. So you're back at your job, but HabitKit, now you have a side project. How did that go, working full-time and working on HabitKit on the side?
I have to say, I wanted to continue working on my apps on the side, so I decided to work only 4 days a week for my previous employer.
That's a nice perk. Like that's not always super possible in a lot of gigs, so that was great.
Yeah, that was really great. That allowed me to take Fridays off and have this whole day for my own apps where I could continue improving my apps and do what I do. That was awesome. So I went back to my old job, and after 2 months or so, something really great happened, actually. I remember back then I was at a friend's wedding on a Saturday, and suddenly my phone started buzzing with a crazy frequency of notifications. And when I checked, that were actually sales notifications from RevenueCat. And I quickly checked some stats, and then I saw that HabitKit finally started to rank in the top 5 for a big keyword on the App Store and Google Play. That led to crazy growth in downloads and revenue.
Really?
Yeah.
So it was like one incremental step up the like search rankings, and then that changed it.
It felt like it, yes.
Yeah. The fold is a real thing, right? Being above the fold and below the fold is a real thing.
Was it a change you made on the ASO side, or was it an algorithm change that boosted you up?
No, I actually didn't change anything back then for 3 months or so. I didn't change anything. So it wasn't a direct change outcome from something.
Wow.
Was that a little unsatisfying to be like, I'm successful, but I don't know why, and I have no control over it?
No, actually, it felt really great.
Okay, good. You're a happier person than I am.
I had absolutely no regrets. It felt more like, finally get
I'm
the recognition.
Yeah. I always knew it was great.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's 2 months into the job. At what point did you hit ramen profitability and then think, okay, now I really can quit?
I guess that was at the start of fall, the end of summer in September. I have to check the numbers, but I guess that was the first time I reached multiple thousands of dollars in revenue. That led me to make the tough decision again. Should I continue at my job, or should I quit and go full time again on this indie hacker thing? That was the point. I had to take a couple of months to think about it because I really felt bad. I really felt sorry for my employer, and I had some great friends at the company, and they were really engaged to bring me back. And yeah, I felt really bad. But with these numbers, I honestly had no other choice to quit.
And so was
again.
that fall of 2022, or was that just this last fall, 2023?
That was last fall. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Wow. And so you've been posting publicly, and we'll get to that here in a sec, but I know all your numbers because you post, like, you have a whole blog with weekly reviews and all that. So you ended 2023 with 120,000 downloads and $51,000 in revenue. Not a bad year for the side project that happened to blow up.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you account for my salary as a software engineer additionally that I had for the second half of the year. Yeah, so that was a absolutely crazy year. And looking back, it even got crazier in January and February of this year.
Yeah, so I was looking at your numbers, prepping for this conversation. And again, you posted all publicly. So just for the listeners' benefit though, so you quit in the fall and went full time. And then I want to ask like why you think this happened. But what happened was in the first 2 months of 2024, you did 60K. So it's almost 10,000 more than the whole 2023, just January and February. And then in March, April, and May, you did another 51K. So in those 3 months, you did the full amount that you had done the previous year, but you had already even done 60K. So you're at 110K of revenue in 2024 so far. Incredible. Congratulations. What happened? Like you quit in the fall, you had some momentum coming in, but what was that inflection point that this really became a real thing in 2024?
I started ranking for the App Store and Google Play for these big keywords in May. And back then, from last winter, I didn't have any points, any numbers of the revenue because I just hadn't gotten to the reach that I have today. So I couldn't really compare and didn't know what would come in winter. I guess it's in the nature of habit tracking apps that it's heavily influenced by seasonality. So at the start of the year, lots of people make resolutions for the new year, start new hobbies, or just generally want to improve themselves. So that's a huge factor, I guess. And that led to the incredible revenue numbers.
Wow. So it wasn't new marketing. It wasn't adding features to the app. It was that you had built this base of a good enough product that people liked it and were willing to pay for it. And then you, I guess, lucked into a combination of building a good product and the algorithms shining favorably upon you, got this momentum in search. Then it was just the organic search and this spike from the new year. And so the inflection point was, again, somewhat out of your control.
That's the beauty of the App Store and Google Play. I mean, you get all these impressions and reach for free, basically, and they do all the marketing. They don't have anything to do with it.
Have you developed any relationship with Apple Editorial or anything like that? Have they given you features or any of the like editorialized stuff?
Not at all. I applied through their form for being featured and stuff like that, but it never really happened. So I'm still waiting for that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Are you doing anything to like leverage? Because I think one of the easy come, easy go with these algorithm things, right? Like, are you worried about another algorithm change or like maybe just you falling down the rankings? Like, how do you think about that as a risk to what you have?
That's definitely a huge point. I'm really afraid or scared of this algorithm changes, but I have my ASO basics in place. I think I didn't do any mistakes. So I'm sure that if I don't make a very big mistake in crashing bug to the app or something like that, that I won't fall down that much in this ranking. I hope so, at least.
I mean, it can be durable, especially as your review base like builds up and like your mini brand. And I don't know how the ASO algorithms work exactly, but I imagine the more click through, and I know they use usage as well as a proxy. So if you have good retention in your product, that gets factored in. So like, again, it sucks. It's a black box. Like you don't know what's going on, but you hope that it's aligned to like the correct incentives. I'm sure Apple wants that. Like they want correct like user incentives. I don't know if they use subscription retention. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know why they wouldn't use that as well as a metric. Obviously, they should be promoting apps that make them more money, right? Like that would be smart for them business wise. But yeah, there is always this fear. You live by the App Store's algorithms, you die by the App Store's algorithms. And I don't know the answer for indie for where you're at, because you could try to build your own acquisition channels. And maybe that's worth experimenting with. And maybe you have experimented with ASA, but even going beyond that. But that suddenly expands just the scope of what you do. You said you experiment with Instagram ads, but let's say you wanted to like experiment with that. Like, you can't just be like, I'll make a crappy ad and put it on TikTok. Like you have to like invest in that as if it's a whole project, right? Like what is going to get people interested? Like what is about my app that's interesting? Like how do I make this work? Otherwise you'll lose money. Like it just won't be a profitable enterprise.
Yeah, I should definitely do this or hire people to do this. But right now I'm focusing on being creative and do the things that are fun to me. Right now
isn't a terrible algorithm, right? Like it's not a terrible algorithm because at least you're going to do it with energy, right? As opposed to if doing TikTok ads is not something that sounds fun to you, don't do it because you'll probably do a bad job.
Exactly. That would probably feel like work again. And being here at home and focus down on my products and make them better, that doesn't feel like work to me.
Which like also, I mean, the recurring subscriptions, right? Like you have recurring subscriptions, even if Apple dropped you out of the top, ideally like you're retaining these people. Maybe even you're capturing the ability to market to them. You're also building your like indie presence, right? You're becoming more of a known thing, right? So you're not just getting the cash and the downloads. Like you're turning this into brand, you're turning it into an install base, and like all of those things are somewhat durable. And there's always chances to like capitalize on that, which you don't have when you're leaving your job for the first time with $0, right, in revenue.
And to Jacob's point from earlier is that now that you have that level of product market fit and you have a channel now, ASO is your channel. And so like what Jacob was saying earlier, it's like you need the channel, you need some pull. And when you have that pull and a channel, then building features is actually maybe the best thing to do. Is that until you see signs that you're dropping in the algorithm, and maybe at some point it would be a night and day difference where you wake up one day and you're out of the top 5 and you're not getting that many downloads. But even then it's like you'd probably drift to 10 and now you're getting half the downloads or whatever. Like it's not going to be night and day drop. But now that you have that kind of buffer and the pull in the market, building a really great app, experimenting with monetization and stuff like that probably is a way better use of your time.
Yeah, maybe. And I also have this other channel that we didn't talk about. So I was building my apps in public and I have actually grown a following on X and nowadays LinkedIn. Even if Apple decides to downrank HabitKit, I always have this audience of people that root for me, that are engaged with me and that want to help me. I can always use that to build a new app or boost a new app to better ranking or stuff.
It's like community. That. I mean, community is super durable. It's why we do this podcast. It's why those activities are very valuable. If you can create content that people find interesting and they want to be a part of it. I was going to ask, I was browsing to the app. I don't think you collect any contact information in the app. Is that correct?
Yeah, so, nothing.
Yeah, which like there's good reasons to do it and not to do it, but like collecting some way of communicating with that user base is really valuable as well. So like, let's say the ASO floor drops out from under you. You can re-engage that user base. You can send them and be like, hey, I see new features. Or like, you could even add, and I'm just giving app advice that you don't want, but like you can always add like a sign up for the HabitKit newsletter, like sign up for email updates and make it very opt-in, right? You can make it very light. That's one thing, even with RevenueCat, I've been surprised is like we were building contact lists for a long time, but we weren't really marketing to it heavily. But then I learned like, yeah, shipping stuff is great, but you have to tell people about it too, or like it doesn't really connect. You can connect those two things, like building new features that are interesting and then telling the people who should care. That's really magical. And that can create this real flywheel effect of like re-engaging existing users, and it can be really durable. But that's always my biggest thing with people who are very successful from the App Store is like, okay, use this momentum to find some way to be successful without the App Store. Because like it might not always be there.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. I got this email list thing on my to-do list. My to-do list is very long.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You talked about the advantages of building in public, like building up a community and like having an audience to market to a little bit, although maybe the audience you're building isn't necessarily people who are going to be subscribers or whatever. But what are some of the other advantages and disadvantages you've seen building in public the way you have?
Building in public has definitely been one of the best decisions that I made while building this app business. The benefits, you will immerse yourself in this really cool community of other builders and creators, developers, designers, and you get to know them, meet up with them or partner up with them. And you can draw a lot of motivation and inspiration from each other. So when I'm feeling down and I'm not really in the mood of building new stuff or something like that, I open Twitter and see my friends building other cool apps and features. I instantly get motivated to do this myself. That's a huge aspect of it. At the start, when you're releasing a new app, you will get a lot of feedback, which is super important.
Even if it's not super durable, right? Like it's just something, some eyeballs, some comments.
That usually really helps with improving the first version. Or it gives you at least a pointer where to move next.
And then have you seen some disadvantages?
There are some disadvantages, but I think that the advantages definitely outweigh them. But sure, when people see that you can make that much money with a relatively simple app like HabitKit, for example, it doesn't take too long until people start copying your app's concept or even shamelessly start copying your design block by block. That's the downside. But I usually try to ignore these copycats and focus on my own stuff.
Yeah. And the thing is, whether you build in public or not, people can see the data on Sensor Tower.
Yeah, you might make it happen a little bit faster by being more visible, but the advantages outweigh them. And we've never committed at RevenueCat to being fully open, right? So it's just different. But we have been, I think, probably more open than most. And for the same reasons, it's like, hey, like we build for builders. So it's like a thing to talk about. People like to see what we're building and how we're building, and it creates a community. And like, once in a while you say something or do something that has some pushback or some blowback, and like you deal with it, you apologize or you issue a retraction or whatever. Maybe this is just a uniquely me problem. This might be a me problem. It hasn't happened that many times, right? But I think in general, if anybody's paying attention to you, that's always, no press is bad press. I honestly think that goes pretty far. If people are talking about what you're doing and you're okay with what you're doing ethically, like I think it's all positive to be out there, put yourself out there.
Yeah, sure. You also get all these mean comments sometimes, or there are always these people that know everything better. And in every post,
it's always interesting though. None of them are more successful than you are. That's really funny. Isn't that how that works? It's just for some reason, it's always the less achieved people who have less to show for it that know all the answers. I don't know. Yeah. There's some correlation there.
They are always smarter than me. Yes. That can be quite intimidating, especially when you start out.
Yeah. If you don't have anything in hand, right? Like you haven't actually proven the ability to build something. Those comments can seem. We have this one we made stickers for it for the team. This one Reddit user who, when we posted our launch thread, called us a rip-off middlemen made easy, because our tagline was in-app subscriptions made easy. And I have it screenshotted and I share it in Slack fairly frequently anytime we have some amount of success. But when we posted that, it was 2017. Like we had no revenue, we had no apps, we had nothing. And so this rando on the internet calling me that. I was like, oh, who is this person? Like, what do they know? Like, do they know more than me? And you take it seriously. And then it takes a while until you don't. But I guess the advice for anybody is just never take the haters seriously. I mean, unless like literally all you get is haters, then maybe listen. Maybe. There is some limit there, but like maybe don't always just post through it. I always save this stuff because like I find it super motivating. Like I keep it for the haters.
Chip on your shoulder.
I have like a haters folder of all the like hateful comments people have said about Revenue Cat, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna use that for fuel.
That's funny. I have the opposite folder. I only
the positive stuff.
Yeah, the positive
stuff. Different strokes for different folks. So whatever it takes. That's probably more diagnosis of psychological profiles than any Myers-Briggs test could ever do.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of unsolicited advice from people who are less successful than you, the last thing I wanted to touch on was your pricing, because I think it's way too low.
Raise your prices.
So I'm curious if you've done any price experimentation and kind of what your pricing philosophy is.
Holy cow, 99 cents a month. Jeez.
99 cents a month, $6 a year, or $15 lifetime. I was going through the app. I'd already downloaded it before, but not paid a ton of attention to your monetization. But when we were talking about you coming on the podcast, I was looking at your paywall and all that kind of stuff. Like, whoa, wait a minute. He's like successful indie charging $6 a year. What's going on here? So yeah, what's your pricing philosophy?
When I released the first app of HabitKit, that felt like the fair pricing point to me. And after that, I was adding feature after feature and lots of cool stuff. And I always said to myself, okay, after the next feature or update, you will raise your prices. And I didn't do it. Yeah, that's it. It's on my to-do list. And
okay, before you do the email list, you know what? You're in this position where you could just double it. Just double it. Yeah. $2 a month. Yeah. That's still really low. And like, nobody's going to get mad.
$12 a year.
Keep doubling it until your haters folder gets too big. And then take it back a notch. I had this app that I sold, Windows app for Microsoft Flight Simulator, that I launched in like 2011 for like $4 or something like this. I wrote it in a weekend. All it did was like take one socket. It connected an iPad app, ForeFlight iPad app, to Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's this really niche little utility. And it was before indie hacking had a name, whatever. I just put it up. There's this thing, Gumroad, that had just launched. I put it up there, $5 a month, and just sold a bunch. And I had all the support. And I was like, oh, geez, whatever. And eventually I was like so annoyed of all the support I was having to do. I was just like, I don't want anybody to download this anymore. So I made it $20 a month. Zero change in downloads. Nobody cool. was like, I probably could have made it $50 and everybody would have still paid, because of course it's like of the niche. Now habits are different, right? You probably couldn't 4x and maybe not see anything, but that was to me like the most visceral experience of not really being able to understand the price value curve, right? Like as a developer, you can't really feel it until you actually take in data points, you know?
Yeah. I think there are always two kinds of people. Some people say, hey, HabitKit is way too inexpensive. You should double your prices. And then there are people, usually bad reviews on Google Play, that say $1 a month for this app. Never. That's a little bit intimidating, but yeah, I should definitely.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, that person has no value to you.
Yeah, they probably would never buy this.
Yeah, they're never going to buy it. And I mean, that's also, being on Android is another, you can't look at your price leverage on Android and iOS the same, right? They're very different communities.
Maybe don't double on Android, but I would put money on the fact that if you doubled your prices, you would make double the money.
That's a 50-50. I'd say 50-50 over under on that one. I think it's pretty likely that that's the case. Yeah. At that price point.
Yeah. $12 a year, $2 a month.
Well, if there is a tool out here, Sebastian, that would let you run that price experiment, fairly low effort. So I know a guy, let me know if you're interested in trying it out, but like you could actually test this.
I heard about it. Yeah. I will definitely do it.
Move that to the top of your to-do list and then share on Twitter and in your weekly log how things turn out. But yeah, as we wrap up, was there anything else you wanted to share? We're going to put links to your blog where you do your weekly updates, to the app, to your Twitter profile and LinkedIn. Yeah, anything else you wanted to share as we wrap up?
Not really. Yeah, that would be great. Check out my apps and my Twitter and leave a review.
Awesome. Well, this was a ton of fun. We haven't done this kind of indie success story in a while, and I'm like all fired up, man. It's so cool to see.
Oh no, David's gonna give himself a 12-month deadline and quit.
Quit your job.
I've already
keep doing the podcast.
Got my app out there. My Weather Up app has been doing really well this year, and it is really fun having.
I miss having an app. I will say, I miss having an app. I miss having an app a little bit, even though I have a big SaaS company, whatever. But like, there is something special, magical about having your own little app. Like, it's fun.
Yeah,
it's great.
It is. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. It was so fun chatting through all this, and best of luck. I think you're going places. Like, I think you've got a great little business here.
Keep shipping.
And it's not going to be so little a year from now and then a year from that. Some of the other folks we've had on, like Curtis Herbert, it's like he did $10,000 his first 2 years, and now he's doing over $1 million a year. So it's crazy how these things can scale from little side projects and indie hacking to real businesses. You know, it sounds like you don't want to like hire people and do that kind of thing, but you can build a great lifestyle business.
Yeah, really crazy. I'm excited for the time to come. And yeah, thank you for having me. And I wish you all the best for HabitKit. Of course, I will use it in every other app I make.
There we go. There's the clip. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. If you have a minute, please leave a review in your favorite podcast player. You can also stop by chat.subclub.com to join our private community.